Hello, everybody. I hope you're having an amazing day and a great start to 2019. I am Zan Lin, and thank you for joining us at WNED WBFO, Making Buffalo Home Conversation today. And we'll discuss about immigration and the economy. We're here in the Delaware North Digital Studio, and then this Facebook Live program is supported by the generosity of Rich Products Corporation, the Rich Family Foundation. So thank you so much for your generosity and support. And I'm joined by Eva Hassett and Bruce Fisher today. Here at the studio. Eva is the executive director of International Institute for Buffalo and a great advocate for immigrants and refugees in Western New York and beyond. And it has been my privilege and honor to have known you for quite a while and gone through quite a bit of adventures together, I guess. And so thank you so much for joining us today. And Bruce is a professor of economics at the Buffalo State College, an avid writer, a very prolific writer. A great author and also a columnist in the public. And so, although I haven't known you for that long, I have read your articles. And
you're the one. Thank you.
Oh yes. So it's been a great honor to have you here. So thank you so much for joining. All right. Okay. So today we are here to gain a deeper understanding of the impact of immigration on our local economy. What are the effects that we have seen? What could happen now that the numbers of immigrants and refugees coming to the U.S. has dropped drastically, especially the past few years? And how do these changes affect each and every one of us? How do these things affect you, me, and your family and your community? So if you have any questions or you want to comment anything, if you have any idea about the discussion today, please feel free to share in the comment box below. And also, it is very important that you share this live stream now so that your friends, families, and the people that you want to share can also have the access to this live stream. And of course, don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you enjoy it, and also give us a like. So thank you so much. All right, let's get into it. All right. So let's start with Eva. Eva, can you please paint a broad stroke about the trend of immigration and population in the past 15 years?
Yep, I'd be happy to. I guess I want to start by saying thank you. And also by saying that Buffalo really is what it is, largely because of immigrants. And I don't just mean the last 15 years. Buffalo is a long-standing gateway for immigrants coming to the country. I wouldn't be sitting here if that weren't true. And the International Institute, where I work, has helped immigrants and refugees for more than 100 years now, which includes many of our ancestors here in Buffalo. I think over the last 15 years, we've seen much clearer evidence of the contribution and positive impact that immigrants are making on the Western New York economy. So we see Grant Street, we see the University of Buffalo as both an institution and the area in Amherst around UB as real evidence of what happens when immigrants are in your community and active and successful in your community. We also see that immigrants and refugees have affected our demographics, our population decline, and this is showing up in the data. So Buffalo has lost population, has been shrinking since 1950. But over the last 15 years, immigrants and refugees really reduced our shrinkage by 40%, a significant amount. And that's a good thing, but now it's not happening.
So that's a great point. Bruce, how about the historical perspective? Can you please tell us a historical perspective about the whole immigration and the population in Western New York?
Yeah. Sure, good to be here. Don't get me started on too much history because I'll spend all afternoon talking about that. Listen,
please.
There's several waves of immigration that have come here, and I'm the product of the first wave, the very first one. 200 odd years ago, some Revolutionary War folks came to Western New York after essentially the conquest. The most significant waves of immigration happened in the middle of the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, and then again after World War II in terms of the numbers. Look, the immigration came both from outside North America and within North America.
Right.
Both the great migrations happened because of the wartime demand and the post-war demand for labor. And the demand for labor, that's what economists are thinking about, the demand for labor. We're going to get back to this again, at the current demand for labor. That is the thing that drives immigration. It is opportunity, it is geopolitics.
If it can.
Right?
If it can.
But we have been fortunate to be the most important during the time of the Erie Canal, it is not Ellis Island that had the most immigrants. It is Buffalo that saw the most immigrants.
You know, Bruce, I am also an immigrant, right? I was born and raised in Burma. I came here 13 years ago in 2006. And my arrival in Buffalo is actually very serendipitous. As a matter of fact, I didn't come here straight. I went to Fredonia. I went to Fred State for one semester, and then in a wintry spring day, a friend of mine actually drove me to Niagara Falls, and then we drove from Niagara Falls, and we decided to drove through Buffalo. What happened was that I actually spotted a Burmese couple on a Delaware Ave. And I knew that because they were in a Burmese traditional costume, and I was so fascinated. I actually asked my friend to pull over. We pull over, and I started to communicate them in Burmese, and they responded me in Burmese.
Yep.
This is where I realized that there is a small Burmese community in Buffalo at that time, and the next day, I submitted my transfer request to UB, and I, came here.
Lucky
And
us.
that summer, I actually interned with International Institute under Denise, and since then, we've been together.
Lucky
so
us.
yeah, and so you're completely right. We come for various reasons. My family are asylees. We fled the condition that none of us could survive.
And that is how it happened in the middle of the 19th century.
Right.
The great
Right.
arrival of the largest single ethnic group in Western New York, the Germans, you
Right.
don't even know about this anymore, came about because of political conditions back home.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Later, in the great industrialization era, political conditions, but also something we talked about that didn't apply in your case, there were recruiting agents looking for labor in central, western, the western part of the Russian
Right,
Empire and southern Europe,
Right, so-
bringing labor here because there was an enormous
Absolutely.
industrial expansion.
Absolutely. And talking about fleeing population, the refugee ceiling, Eva, what's going on, the current situation?
Yeah, so since 1980, the federal government, the U.S. federal government, has resettled refugees. They started this program in 1980 because of the Vietnam War and the actions that the U.S. had taken that were creating refugees
Right.
from Vietnam. So the government got involved. In the 40 years of the program, where every year the president, Democrat or Republican, gets to set the level of refugee admissions for the year, we have never been at as low of a level.
goodness, yeah.
And this is not because there aren't refugees in the world who are looking to come here or
more
fleeing
refugees, right. We have more
persecution,
refugees, yeah.
famine, drought. We have more refugees now in the world than ever before.
That's true.
And yet the U.S. level is the lowest. It's also true that this administration has reduced the numbers of immigrants coming in on every kind of visa. We were talking about different kinds of work visas before, H-1B, tourist visa, student visa. So the federal government has acted to reduce the numbers in every category.
Right.
And it's also, I just want to make one last point, it's also true that there are immigrants who have a choice about where they come, right? So refugees don't.
Right.
But tourists and students and many workers and entrepreneurs have a choice about where they go, and they're choosing to go elsewhere. And so all of that is making these numbers drop.
So can you explain very, very briefly about H-1B visa? What is H-1B visa? Because people might not, people are not fully aware of H-1B visa situation. So yeah, if you could just.
I can do as much as a non-immigration
Right.
lawyer can do. So H-1B is a worker visa. It's a category of visa that's allowed. It's a sort of a special visa
Right.
for a company that says that this foreign-born worker is able to do something that no native-born person can do. And so it is often used in very highly technical, highly the science, technology, engineering, and math categories, which, as I hope we know, are really significant to the economy. And what's happened over the last year is not only have the numbers been shrunk, I think every year for as long as I can remember, whatever the number of visas are automatically oversubscribed in like 2 seconds.
right.
Employers get to bid for them, and immediately there aren't enough. What has happened in addition to that is that the rate of denial for visa applications under this worker visa is way up.
So that's an addition of all the applications that is currently lagged at the court system.
Correct.
So the millions that is actually added up, and so yeah.
But I want to
And
be.
this
I
is a
want to
very-
just. I want to make this. Excuse me, Bruce. I want to make this as relevant to people who are watching as I can. This is companies in Buffalo, Roswell Park Cancer Institute, which cannot bring a foreign-born cancer researcher to Buffalo because they can't get the immigration vehicle for that. The University of Buffalo that can't bring students who pay the bills at UB. Right? That's how this impacts our economy.
Right. But folks, please also note that we are not here to discuss about immigration policy, but analyze the effects of immigration has on our economy in a way that give us all all of us a clear picture. So let's move on and let's talk about let's connect the dots. Bruce, so can you please help us connect the dots? How has immigration helped shape our local economy landscape? How has that helped?
Well, there's always a demand for labor. That's the question. That's why we have this HB1 visa. That's why we have the other kinds of work visas. And we are in a medium-sized or small metro area. So we have specific needs that are not going to be met unless we have a federal government and, frankly, state and local government engaged and understanding. We are not New York. We are not Chicago. We are not Los Angeles. Look, something like 25% of the population today in Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx is foreign-born.
More than 25%.
Something over 50% in Toronto is foreign-born. We in Buffalo are doing okay so far because we're almost around 10%, okay? That, it's not a causative, but it's a close correlation. Economists don't want to attribute statistics to causation. But this is, it is a gauge of our economic prospects, okay, and of our health. If we have this problem in the federal government having changed policy, that means that in order for us to continue to maintain, to sustain programs, research programs, student populations, workforce, we need state and local government and thought leaders to get it. This is an economic development piece. It's an economic sustainability. It's an economic survivability piece.
Sure. So Eva, do you want to add something on it?
Yeah, I guess thinking about the population piece, I think the biggest challenge to the Western New York economy is that we've had a declining population for 70 years. Between 1960 and 1980, Buffalo lost 1/3 of its population. We all know this. We talk about this. Let me just finish my point. That most of who left were working age people, or young people left, right? So what that means is when, and those of us who lived here in the 1990s know what it was like to live in a place that had just lost a significant amount of its working age population. We have continued to shrink. You can't sustain an economy or grow it without people. People are the viewers of WNED, and they're the customers at businesses, and they're the homeowners.
If I may jump in on this point, it is, let's not be focused on the individual municipal entities like Buffalo, the city of Buffalo, the city of Niagara Falls. We do have an ongoing problem of sprawl, okay? The problem is regional. Okay, the region of Buffalo, New York, we were 1.2 million in 1970. We're less than that now. That's 2 counties. This is not only Buffalo. It is Rochester. It is Syracuse.
Yeah, it's upstate.
It is
upstate.
It is Binghamton. So we see the same challenges all throughout the Rust Belt. Now the Rust Belt, in our view, stretches essentially from the Hudson Valley to the Mississippi River. And we today are talking about Buffalo. We're also talking about Cleveland. We're also talking about Detroit. We're also
Here's an interesting fact.
So,
in the first 15 years of this century, the foreign-born drove half the population growth in the Rust Belt and 2/3 of the working-age population growth in the Rust Belt.
It is,
so, and that's to 2015. So that's while lots of immigrants and refugees were coming in. That changed in 2016. So how, in the Rust Belt, are you going to make do and maintain an economy without 2/3 of the growth?
And here's the point, if I may jump in on this point. Sometimes our national policymakers think that they're addressing the needs of the country. The needs of the country overall in the aggregate are very different than the Rust Belt's needs. We need these folks. They might not need them in LA or New York where they've got them. We need them.
And in addition, in our region, the working age population, it's shrinking, right? So a lot of the people who are in the workforce right now are baby boomers, and when they
I resemble
are no
that
more
remark.
in the workforce,
too.
how are we going to sustain the economy, right? So. That's actually very important. But we want to hear from you, folks. What do you think about it? Do you have any if you have any comments, if you have any things that you want to add to this discussion, please feel free to do so.
Are you an employer?
Yes, are
How
you an
easy
employer?
is it to find employees?
Right. So please, join us to this conversation. Again, this is a Facebook Live, so we want a lively conversation between you and the great panelist who has a tremendous knowledge about things. And so. Now, since we're talking about all the the workforce and employees and employments and things like that, there is this prevailing myth that immigrants and refugees are taking our jobs. Is there any truth to it?
We have more jobs than we have people.
Right.
at
So
the moment.
I'm actually more worried about jobs leaving
Yes.
here. I lived here in the 1990s. That's what was going on in the 1990s. Jobs were leaving because companies couldn't find employees. Now, clearly, the workforce issue is a big issue. We have people who live here now who
Right.
aren't able to get jobs or not jobs that pay well enough for them to sustain themselves. That's all really important. But I think what we're talking about today is the fact that we just don't have enough people. Our population continues to shrink and to age, and we don't have enough people. And you can ask any employer out there, that's the issue. So there's plenty of studies. I talk about a study by the International Economic Development Council that shows that immigrants don't take other people's jobs. In fact, when immigrants work, they create new jobs and they raise wages for everybody. That's what the studies say. And that's particularly true in the STEM fields, by the way, the science, technology, engineering, and math fields. But what we're talking about today is really plain old demographics. If we don't have enough people, we're going to lose jobs.
And just so that you know, the study that Eva just discussed will be posted on a Making Buffalo homepage. So please make sure to check it out.
Right.
It's a really cool study. So please, continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
to
I was going to
interrupt.
say, so the loss of population, the loss of working age population, the loss of jobs, the loss of people who would be buying homes and spending their money in the local economy contributes so negatively to our economy. I'll go back to the 1980s, 1990s. So I was the finance commissioner for the city of Buffalo from 1994 till, I don't know, 2000, something like that. And Buffalo at that time, and I think Buffalo in many ways still struggles because its tax base does not produce enough tax revenue to support the services that the city needs to provide. It's why the Buffalo schools depend on the state's aid so much, right? 90-something% of the revenue
That's why
for the
the city
Buffalo
of Buffalo-
schools.
it's
City of
fundamental that
Buffalo
Buffalo has it,
also
too.
depends on state aid.
Yeah.
And those tax revenues pay for police, for fire, for the schools. I mean, that's what taxes pay for. And so if you don't have enough of a tax base, enough people owning homes and working at wages that cause them to pay taxes, property taxes or income taxes, you're going to have trouble maintaining support for those services.
And again, this is a regional. This involves not only the center city. This
Everything.
involves
Right.
the region. This involves the folks who rely on healthcare, the folks who rely on roads and
Right.
infrastructure to get their businesses. Look,
There's a lot of vacant homes in some of the suburban towns now.
exactly. Let's be clear about the dynamic that we're facing right now. Okay, the national government has made a change that's very, very different than the policy that has been in place essentially since the Revolutionary War. Okay, there was only one period in American history before. That was shortly after the beginning of World War I, when there was a drop-off in immigration.
Right.
But let me make this point. Right now, we are in competition, especially upstate New York. We are in competition,
Totally.
not
Yeah.
only with Brooklyn and
Right,
Queens
right,
as the entry points and New Jersey. Okay, we're in competition with Ontario.
Right.
The Ontario provincial government, on its own, notwithstanding everything else that's going on in that province, has explicitly asked for 1 million new immigrants in the next year. This is a burgeoning economy.
Right.
They are challenging. I'm a participant in a lot of their planning discussions up there and governance issues for many years. They have an issue that we
They've recognized it, and we haven't.
they
Bruce,
have a recognition
Yep.
of the
Go ahead.
vitality
We have
of
a question.
immigration.
So we have a question from one of the
Yeah.
one of the viewer, and I think it would apply to you, Bruce, I guess, or both, and please answer.
Sure.
Do we have any information about the impact on the agricultural sector?
Yes,
Right.
we do. And right at the moment, the agricultural sector in Western New York, as in many Rust Belt cities, seems to have been shrinking as a share of the overall gross domestic product. However, the agricultural sector in New York State as a whole is immense and very important, has been growing because it's been getting more and more value added. This business of Greek yogurt, who knew that Greek yogurt was going to
Oh
become
my
a
goodness,
thing?
yes, yeah.
Greek yogurt is now
Yeah.
an international phenomenon. The problem that I have heard anecdotally from dairy farmers, okay, and you know one of them.
Labor. Yep,
Labor.
labor.
Right, that's
Okay,
true. That's
because many of the people with the skills and the interest in doing that work are not from upstate New York.
true. Right.
Okay,
Right.
and there is a real problem and a real concern that the agricultural sector has nationwide, but specifically here. What about this coming year?
Right.
What about this coming planting season? What about this coming harvest season? The people who are migratory workers or migratory workers, the pickers, okay, that is a seasonal thing that happens from Caribbean workers and from the southern United States. Folks come from, but it's getting the crops in the ground, and there's a big concern right now.
So thank you so much for this question. It's actually Vicky. So Vicky, thanks so much for this great question, and then thanks so much, Bruce and Eva too. So let's move on to education and jobs. The impact of immigration on education and jobs. So what's going on with the, for instance, Buffalo Public School System? The impact of the new people coming in. So what are the implications for?
Well, I think. But for the refugee and immigrant families and children who have put their kids in schools, not just in Buffalo, but all over this region.
Right.
The school census, the number of kids in the schools would have dropped just like our population has dropped, right? If we
Would have
get
dropped even
smaller and
further.
older, would have dropped even further. So I guess, looking at it from an economic point of view, the kids are the customers to the school districts.
Right.
And if we don't have customers for the school districts, what happens to the school districts, right?
Right.
What happens? And so the fact that there are foreign-born kids in the schools, while there are challenges, I believe that we know how to deal with those challenges. We need to get organized and be more strategic and work together better, and we need to find those foreign educated teachers and recertify them so we have more bilingual teachers
knowledge
in all of
transfer,
our
yeah.
districts, which would be really easy to do, and other states are doing it, by the
That's
way.
right. That's right.
But
Like Cleveland,
but
Ohio, yeah.
again, from an economic point of view, if we lose those families, I mean, the reality is we are losing the immigrant and refugee population. If we don't recruit, they're not coming. Anybody who works in this industry can tell you this is a serious problem for the economics of school systems. This is a serious problem for our economics in general.
Let me just make 2 points. It's sad that we have to have the conversation about publicly funded charter schools setting up shop at a time when our student population, our student census is stagnant or declining. Our student population overall in Western New York has dropped considerably since we did the first Buffalo billion. Okay, but retaining these folks is really important. Look, our opportunity, one of our opportunities here for folks coming from the coastal places, is that it's a much better deal for a family to live here.
Oh, absolutely.
It's much better in terms of the price of housing, in terms of the share of household income that needs to go to public transportation or private transportation, since our public transportation system is so inadequate.
Right.
That's a whole other conversation.
Well,
but here's the point. We are overbuilt in terms of our educational infrastructure, but we're lacking is an understanding across boundary lines. Again, these boundaries get in the way. That if we refocus our resources, we become a magnet.
Right.
A magnet and not a difficult place.
Right,
But
right,
it needs
right.
a strategy. Let me
How
just,
does it- yeah,
can I
sure.
make the
Sure,
UB
yeah,
point?
sure. Yes, absolutely.
That's
So
what I was
yes,
gonna say.
exactly. So how about higher ed? How does it turn out for the higher education institutions? in
again,
New York?
tuition
Yeah.
dollars.
International students
Yes.
have been a really significant population at the
Seriously.
University of Buffalo. UB has been among the top 25
absolutely.
colleges, universities in
Right.
the country
Right.
for international students. International students pay a higher tuition than New York State students or domestic students. This population is dropping across the country. And again, why is that? That's because they have a choice about where they want to go. And for many, the anti-immigrant sentiment, policies, added to the visa problem, the international student visa problem, make them say, you know what, I think I'll go to Canada. I think I'll just go to Canada because Canada is going to work really hard to make sure that I can be a success, so I'll just go to Canada. I don't want to debate the policy, I would, but what I really want to say is, what does this do to the institution of the University at Buffalo and all the other colleges, universities, which are among our biggest employers
Yes, they
in Buffalo, New York? So if Roswell Park can't get a doctor or a researcher, if the Kaleida can't get a doctor or researcher, if UB can't get students or professors, remember the president of the university is an immigrant. What does this do to these institutions that employ people, that pay people who then spend their money in our economy? This is not good.
We have built these institutions over generations, and we have experienced. Okay, and until I got invited to participate in this, I didn't really understand just how central the immigration process has been to the expansion of these institutions. Okay, and you know, right now, because I'm involved in thinking about the demographics of SUNY colleges. There are challenges all across upstate New York. Okay, there's an enormous increase in the population of children and native-born and foreign-born in the New York metro area.
Yep.
But there is a crying need to sustain our own institutions in upstate New York. You talk about having gone to Fredonia.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Fredonia has just undergone significant downsizing. The census, the enrollment at Buffalo State College, where I teach, has dropped. My classes are full.
Right.
I think it's because I'm such a sweet and easy teacher. Right? But what it indicates is that
Oh my goodness,
I
of
teach
course.
economics.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So folks are thinking about the opportunities for post-educational employment.
That's true.
And so we have the infrastructure. We have economists, we have financial people, we have a business school, we have a law school, we have engineering, we have STEM. We have the infrastructure here, and the question that we have is, again, are the immigrants going to continue to come from, if they're not coming from overseas, how do we get them here? Because we are set up to handle them.
So that actually makes me wonder, so what type of jobs or the employments that are currently filled by immigrants, for foreign-born immigrants, refugees? Yeah.
Every job you can think of.
Yeah.
Every job you can think of. We
Especially
have an
important.
employment program at the International Institute.
Sure.
Immigrants have a wide range of skills and life experience, and we employ people, we help find jobs for people in every industry you can think of. Right now the problem is we have more demand than we do supply of people, and that's true in general.
Are there any particular industry that relies so much on immigrant labor? Healthcare.
Yeah, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about with respect to healthcare, we currently in Western New York and in most of the country, I think, there's a shortage of doctors and nurses. There's also a shortage of teachers, by the way, particularly bilingual teachers. But we all have heard someone tell the story of somebody who, I was traveling and I got in a taxi cab and I was talking to the taxi cab driver, and holy cow, the taxi cab driver was a doctor from Burma, but he was driving a taxi cab.
Right.
Well, that represents a very serious problem for the United States of America and for New York State and for Buffalo, because if we don't help that taxi cab driver become a doctor, their wages are depressed, which means their economic contribution is less, right? They don't pay as much in taxes, and we don't get them to be a doctor where we have a shortage.
So
the entity that needs to fix that, the state of New York.
Exactly.
The state of New York is who certifies doctors and teachers and nurses. other states in this country have recognized the problem. It's kind of like Canada. Minnesota, Washington State, Massachusetts, they recognized that they were never going to be able to educate and graduate enough doctors fast enough to deal with the shortage. Everyone's care is affected by the shortage of doctors.
Right. So there is this great article, right, Eva, that discuss about the the whole shortage and everything.
Yep.
So we'll post in the brain
It's
waste.
called the brain waste
right?
study, actually,
Study,
2 years old, called Brain Waste. And it actually put a number on the difference in wages between the taxi cab wage and the doctor wage. And it did it just for New York State. It did it for the whole country and for New York State. In New York State, the lost wages between doctor wage, I'm simplifying, and taxi driver wage is $5 billion. Nationally, it's $39 billion. $5 billion in New York State, which could pay about $600 million in taxes.
Absolutely.
$600 million in taxes that New York State isn't getting, which means we're all paying them because they're not coming.
Right.
If we just worked to get that
And
taxi driver to be a doctor.
And there is a need. There's a gap of the
shortage.
here's the conversation about economic development, especially in the Rust Belt, is not about these labor issues, not about these skill issues. The conversation about economic development seems to be left over from the 1960s and 1970s, where the conversation was about regulation and taxation. Okay, regulation and taxation has been demonstrated over and over again. I first wrote a book about this 31 years ago.
31 years ago. You still remember it. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you know, it's so, like, to me, it's so glaring. Maine just did the state of Maine just figured out how they could make emergency medical technicians faster out of foreign educated immigrants because that's how healthcare is dispensed in rural settings, right? So if Maine can do it and Minnesota can do it and Washington can do it, why aren't we talking about it in New York State?
And the answer, in part, is that our political conversations are using antique words. They're antique phrases. They're not informed by the information. Look at all the data we're sitting here with, folks. Okay,
It's pretty glaring.
These numbers. Okay,
but
these
they
numbers
told me not to bury people in studies.
Oh yeah.
I'm not gonna cite the numbers, but I'm gonna literally point to them and say, look, the numbers are not invented.
No,
okay?
no, they're facts.
What we need to accomplish in our political discourse among our thought leaders, and again, this is not just about political leaders, okay? This is about the
business
conversation
community
in the business community. So we should be having this conversation in a forum at the Buffalo Club, at the partnership. Seriously,
it's just the Buffalo Club.
So what do you? So we'll get back to it. And so if any of you have a medical provider, the doctors and nurses who are foreign-born, please put it in a comment. We want to know about it and your experience with them. But we have one comment. Actually, no, we're good. Sorry. So let's move on to tourism. The Western New York tout that we have such a great asset. The tourism, the potential of tourism in Western New York. How does it play within?
Well, I don't know. When you were last at Niagara Falls and you looked at the tourists who were in Niagara Falls, were they pretty? Could you tell whether they were foreign-born or not?
Absolutely.
Right. So, what's happened nationally? Let me finish. Is what's happened nationally is that foreign tourism has dropped nationally.
Yes.
In fact, they call it the Trump Slump as a consequence because it dropped when this president was elected, who was very clear right away about being anti-immigrant. Remember, one of the first things that happened was a travel ban, right, when this president took office. So let's think about, in Western New York, how dependent our economy is on tourism. I would argue it's pretty dependent. And that the Trump slump and big drops in foreign tourists is going to have an impact on employment in the hotel and restaurant industry. Now, go ahead.
Let me, thank you.
And we will post, there's actually a link we can post.
Yeah, we can post it on
and let me give you the other news. There has been a recognition of the Trump slump, okay? So Eva, you asked the question, who do you see in Niagara Falls? Well, which Niagara Falls?
Right.
I'll tell you what you see in Ontario.
Yep, absolutely.
What you see in Ontario is something that I worked with for many years. We had a binational leaders forum 15 years ago where we in Erie County put together the folks from Ontario and New York State for the purpose of creating this binational effort. It was carried on beautifully, but for most of the effect, the most benefit happened on the Niagara Falls, Ontario side of the equation.
Right.
Why? Because they are hospitable to, they make
Diversity is a positive.
and the Trump slump made this difference much greater. Look, our challenge here is again that the federal government is wagging the tail. Okay, we're at the tail. That, however, does not mean that we are powerless.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
It means that we have to rethink what our situation is.
Right.
And that means thought leaders, business leaders, and the elected officials.
I think Buffalo and Western New York, upstate and New York State are actually really competitively positioned
we are.
if we wanted to recruit immigrants here to live here and be successful. Frankly, we could recruit non-immigrants too. I think we should be recruiting
Whoever
all
comes
kinds
to
of
Western
people.
New York is great, yeah.
Well, but my point is we need people. Immigrants are a proven positive impact on the economy, and immigrants are mobile. But I think we could recruit lots of people to Western New York, and we should be because we need them.
And let's be very clear on this point.
I told you.
Recognize the great benefit of our border situation. Again, to Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls didn't go away.
Right.
So we still have it.
So Catriel just commented once. There's a great comment. So that person was asking, what about those who actually try to bring in immigrants from other part of the country?
Right. I think that's
Second
actually
population.
that would be the
Exactly,
strategy that I would think we need. Although I don't think there's been any real, leadership discussion of it. Here's what I think.
Our price advantage.
I think
Oh my
we
goodness,
are,
yeah.
but hang on. So we are not only affordable and great value, and we hear this, we hear it, one-on-one. We hear a story of somebody who moved from Brooklyn and said, oh my God, that's how much houses cost here. But there is no strategy around this. And I believe that there could be a strategy. We even made a name for it, some of the folks that I work with. We call it Regrow Upstate. And our idea for the strategy name would be, instead of I Love New York, which is the tourism thing, would be New York Loves You.
New York loves
Would be New York Loves You.
That's great.
Come here,
So-
New York loves you. We'll help you get a job.
Right,
We'll help you
right,
buy a house.
right. Let's talk.
We
House,
could recruit,
yeah.
because we can't change, well, I'd like to, but
Right,
I haven't yet
right.
figured out how to change the
Right,
federal immigration
right.
policy, but we could recruit from places in the country where immigrants might
So
not feel welcome and might not be as well
let's
supported.
we're really short on time,
thanks
but
for the
let's talk about that 500-pound gorilla in the room, the housing market. You just mentioned about buying a house. So what does it mean that we have less immigrants coming
we
in?
have fewer people
you
to
know,
buy
yeah.
houses.
Well,
There was a study Bruce, there was a study that I think you'll post by Urban Land Institute
We'll post it, yes, yeah.
that looked at 5 places in the country. Buffalo was one of them. And the study concluded that immigrants are driving the demand for single-family homes, particularly in the suburbs, that those are the buyers of houses in the suburbs. So what does it mean if they're not coming? It means those houses aren't getting bought, or they aren't getting bought for the price, and that affects your value of your house. Sorry.
Well, here's the other thing.
Bruce, yeah.
There are a bunch of things that affect the value of your house, and a bunch of things about our housing market that we need to think about in terms of folks who are currently here and folks who want to form households. Number one reality is that we have a massive oversupply of houses.
Right.
Massive oversupply of houses. We have about 1,000, 1,100 building permits a year around here.
And we're
okay?
still building more.
I live these numbers,
Right,
okay?
right,
So we also have, sadly, about 35,000 vacant units
Oh,
here,
yes.
okay?
Oh, yes.
So
Not just in the city either.
not just in the city, but
Right.
so the good news for renters and home buyers is it is a deal. I sound like the guy, I'm an upstate New York Yankee, but I sound like the guy. I've got such a deal for you, right?
Right,
Let me
right.
tell you, we do have such a deal for you. We have a deal for housing, and this deal is one of the things that is driving some of the migration from the high-cost areas of New York
Right.
State. Here, look, as good as Ontario is, remember something about Ontario right now. They have a housing affordability crisis in Ontario. We have a moment of opportunity that I think is going to be years, but we need our thought leadership to get our heads around this.
And I know, Bruce, we can actually spend 24 more hours on housing if we want to talk about it. But real quick, so Sarah actually mentioned that many immigrants are coming in and contributing in our community. So thank you so much, Sarah, for commenting on that. Thank you. And one more thing before we actually wrap up. How about the entrepreneurship? I mean, we're seeing a lot of immigrants who are coming in and starting to do the business in our communities. Can you touch very briefly on that, because we're really running short on
It's
time?
a very significant phenomenon.
I think that immigrants have shown to be more entrepreneurial at every level. So whether it's Sergey Brin, who started Google, who came as a refugee, Elon Musk, by the way, is a refugee, right, or is an immigrant. So we have lots and lots of big names we know, but it's also true at the neighborhood scale. So we talk a lot about Grant Street in Buffalo. But showing up in the data is that immigrants own a disproportionate number of those kind of businesses.
Startups.
We call them Main Street businesses. So restaurants, grocery stores, the things that make your neighborhood a place you want to live. And they are not only, they own a large majority of those businesses, but the rate of growth in immigrant-owned Main Street businesses is all the net growth. So that, again, if we lose immigrants, Grant Street goes back to what it looked like 15 years ago.
Oh my God! Yes, I still remember that Grant Street because I came here 13 years ago, so I remember it. Yes.
But again, we have an institutional setup ready and right now working. Besides the Small Business Administration, we happen to have at Buffalo State College the Small Business Development Center, which has been extraordinarily effective in helping newcomers, wherever they're from, start businesses. And so the reason that Grant Street looks the way it does, in part, is because of this institutional engagement, the capacity being put to use. Folks, tell your friends out of town, okay?
A special shout out to Susan McCartney, right? Yeah, she's.
But if you don't have the people, it doesn't matter.
So real quick, Mary actually mentioned that this has been very informative discussion.
Mary.
So thank you, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us. So we really it's we can actually talk, as I said, 24 more hours on this because it's so informative and so interesting. But where are we gonna move next? Where are we gonna go from here? So what are the things that we strategically, the thoughts and strategy for Buffalo moving forward?
It's the thinking with the economic development folks. Do you agree with me, Eva?
Yeah, I think for the folks watching, I hope we've convinced you that immigrants have a positive economic impact, that the fact that they're not coming here has a negative economic impact, and that there's an opportunity for a strategy, and that strategy needs to be about recruiting people to come to Western New York, however we're going to do it, and that immigrants need to be a part of that strategy. So the issue is, can we as a community continue to advocate with mayors and county executives and state legislators and congresspeople to say, hey, wait a minute, our economic survival depends on us having a strategy to recruit people to Western New York
the survival
and help them,
piece is
right?
That is
and it's not just about the immigrants. It's about my economic survival, your economic survival. It's about everybody's economic survival.
Let's be very clear.
I don't want to go back to the 1990s.
Let's be very well. The 1990s is when I came home, right?
So me too, Bruce.
So I remember meeting you at a baseball game.
Yeah.
But I don't want to go back there. I want us
It's
to
too
grow.
cold to go back there. But let me tell you about survival. Here's the problem that we're looking at right now. We can't gild the lily here. We can't whistle past this graveyard. It's this. We have so many new openings. The demand for labor is so specific and so urgent. If we do not seize the moment pretty darn soon, then folks will, especially, hate to say it, but the Brookings Institution study that I read this morning, it points out again, the superstar cities are getting the folks with the highest SAT scores. Awesome. We have to grab this, but it, again, requires us to recognize we can't change Washington, but we sure can direct Albany.
We can control Buffalo.
All right, cool, awesome. As I said,
you,
we can
Lynn.
continue talking for the whole month, Bruce and Eva. But thank you so very much for joining us today. Such a thoughtful insight, folks. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
But this is not a done deal, right? So this video will be posted on a webpage, WNED webpage, and so please feel free to go back and watch again or share with your friends and families. Comments, please. Keep sending us comments and questions. we would love to hear from you. So thank you so much. I would also like to encourage you to go visit the Making Buffalo Home webpage. It is at wned.org/Making Buffalo Home. You can find a lot more information about the topic on immigration in our community and even share your own story with us. So again, thank you so very much from Delaware North Digital Studio. I am Zan Lin. Thank you so very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Good job.
Thanks.
It's a tough crowd.
You're a pro.
It's a tough crowd.
Support for Making Buffalo Home is provided by Rich Products Corporation and Rich Family Foundation.